Record on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of having a Mom of Many interview with me, Tara, your host. Today, I have the pleasure of meeting with my new friend, Annabel from Wyoming, right?
Yes.
I said it right, because all of a sudden I was like, no, was it Washington State? It started with W. So Annabel is a mom of almost 4. She's pregnant with surprise baby number 4, and she has a really intriguing mom journey. She's gone through some pretty intense stuff with 2 of her boys. I'm going to let her get into it, but I just want to say thank you for joining us today for this interview, to get to know Annabel, to be encouraged as moms on our own journey of grace. So we're just going to dive right into it and meet Annabel, who's being so kind to meet with us, though she's been having a pretty tough pregnancy with some pretty severe morning sickness, like medical grade, and she's had a run for a couple of days. So thank you again, Annabel, for making time. And she did let us know if she just needs to spit off screen for a second, that's what it does to help her. We totally understand. So there's grace to just be where you need to be right now. So Annabel, tell us a little bit about yourself. Do you like where you live, what your family does, and does your husband work, do you work, and a little bit about your kids? Just, hi, how are you? Who are you?
Yeah. So we live in northern Wyoming in a little town called Powell. We're right outside of Cody, which is a tourist town, and we're right at the base of Yellowstone. If you go in the other direction, we're at the Montana border. And so the big city on that side would be Billings, Montana, which is where we go for like sometimes medical care, or like if we need to do Costco or Target or anything like that. It's up that way. And so we have 3 kids, like you said, and 1 more on the way. Our oldest is Selah. She's 9, and she is, gosh, amazing. But she was our first. We knew that we wanted to homeschool her in the beginning, and started her out homeschooling for kindergarten, and then shortly after, the next year we had to put her in public school for other reasons, but we found out that she was dyslexic, and so we've been going and helping her with that. And behind her we have a little boy who's named Toby. He's 7. He is a cancer survivor. And then we have Thelonious, who is 4, and he had something called FPIES, which stands for food protein induced enterocolitis syndrome. And essentially it's a delayed reaction to food. And so he would react to breast milk, like to what I was eating through my breast milk. I ended up on a total elimination diet nursing him. And then when he would eat, it would be 2 to usually 4 hours after he ate that he would start projectile vomiting, and he would become limp and lethargic and go gray and unresponsive and go into shock. And so they were born all pretty much back to back within 4 years of each other. My daughter was maybe 4.5 when he was born. He was sick right away. We knew something was wrong right away. And it wasn't until almost age 1 that we got a diagnosis for him. And at that point, he had stopped growing. He was 11 months, I believe, and he had not grown since his like 8-month appointment. And in length or in weight, he hadn't gained anything, and he hadn't grown any longer. He was still wearing 6-month clothes. It was very intense. And when he was 15 months old, that's when our son Toby got cancer. And so we battled both illnesses at the same time. And and it was a challenge, which is why we opted for public school for my daughter for first grade. Um, we have been through a lot with those boys, and as soon as they were well enough, we were living in Denver when they were babies. As soon as they were well enough, we wanted to come out of the city and move somewhere where we could buy a more affordable house. And so we came up to Wyoming, and it's been wonderful. We love it here. My husband works from home. He was actually, it was a huge blessing because in the middle of our cancer journey, he was working for Lyft. Yes, Lyft. He was working for Lyft, and he was also working for a mobile DJ company in Denver, doing parties and like trivia. If you go to like a restaurant or bar and they have trivia nights or whatever, he would host those. He would do weddings and things like that, corporate events. And it was great, but it was also not very predictable, and it was nights away, which was hard. And so in the middle of that cancer journey, he was offered an office job that was a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday kind of a deal. And the way that his job was set up was that he was actually working, even when he was in the office, working remotely, because the people that he worked with were based in Kansas City. And so he didn't actually work with people in his office. He works in radio doing traffic. And so he will schedule the flow of commercials for the stations that he works for. He has to make sure that all of the time is filled and that he's optimizing company revenue, because if he's choosing lower paid spots, then they're not making as much money as they could. So that's what he does. And when COVID hit, it just transitioned seamlessly to an at-home position. And they've closed down the office and everybody was allowed to work from home, and we were able to bring that job with us to Wyoming. And so that was a very, very huge blessing. You're hungry, baby. Hey, I'm having a talk with another mommy, okay? Can you guys go watch shows and eat some popcorn? Okay. I'll say I'll help you fill those up if you need, okay? Okay. Go on. So that's my littlest.
Which one of your boys was that?
That's my littlest, Thelonious.
And you guys call him, what's his nickname?
Thelo.
Thelo, so cool.
Yes. We yes, Toby, our middle boy, I didn't tell you very much about him. He is super musical, super artistic. He has a drum set in the garage, and he will go out there and like try and recreate what he hears in music, and really loves it. He's super, super artistic in like design. Like he really loves those perler beads. Mm-hmm. And he will sit and he'll make different patterns and designs, and he'll just do it for hours. He'll make like 6 of them in a row, and just like one for every member of the family. Mommy, will you mail these to Colorado, please? I don't think I can, but maybe we can bring them with us. And so he'll just make them, and he's super, super creative. He's not a sit around kind of a kid. He always wants to be doing something. And then Thelo is super high energy, really, really just like rough and tumble. He really craves sensory input. And so he wants to like play rough and jump around and feel that bang when he lands. And we have this bookshelf that's pretty high, and it's very much a supervised activity, but my husband or I, when he was smaller, we would put him on top of it and he would just jump down over and over, because he just loved to like land Superman style and like feel that hard thud when he landed. So he has always been a very rough and tumble kind of guy, but he's also super snuggly and sweet. And when I walk into a room, he says, "Good morning, beautiful," or "Hi, beautiful." And he kisses my belly all the time. It's the sweetest thing.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for telling us about your children, and like your love for them is so apparent. And you were saying when we were chatting a little bit that because you've gone through it, and I do want to talk a little bit more about your experiences with very serious childhood illness. You
Mhm.
said that because you've come so close to losing
Yeah,
your children, it's changed your perspective on being a
right.
mom. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was always we had Selah when I was 27. I'm sorry, it's really hard to not cry when I think about those things. And it was fairly seamless. I was a nanny before I had her, and I always wanted to be a mom. I always knew that that was my goal and my desire in life. Um, and so when I had my first baby, it was really pretty seamless. I was home with her, and it just was natural and a really special time. And then we had another, and my husband worked a lot, but it was fine. And really, those first few years of motherhood, probably like the first 4.5, were just really amazing. Um, they were pretty healthy at the time. They were um, really fun kids to be around and easygoing, um, and that was special. But when they got sick, when the boys were sick, um, it things just changed. When Thilo was sick, when he was a baby, he cried all the time, and so there was a level of stress in our home, which was hard. When he started to get interested in solid foods, um, but he didn't have anything safe to eat, he um, we had to block off our kitchen and hide from him when anybody was eating. And so our table was in a place where he couldn't see it, and one of us would have to hold him in another room so that he couldn't see that people were eating, because if he saw that he was missing out, he would cry, and it would be really difficult to console him. And so we would eat in shifts where, like, when my husband was home, he would serve the kids, and then I would hold the baby, and then he would eat, and then as soon as he was done, he would come and he would hold the baby and I would eat. But the baby couldn't see us eating. It was very stressful. We also had different diets because I was nursing him on a total elimination diet, and so what I was eating was not what the kids were eating. It's not what um, the rest of the family was eating. And then when he eventually started to gain foods, there was another third person in the mix. So what he was eating was not what I was eating, was not what the rest of the family was eating. It
Wow.
was 3 different meals, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
It was very tricky and very stressful. We had like a log, we would keep it on the wall, like a board where we would log what his safe foods were and what he could not have. Um, and we would have to make sure that there weren't any additives in his food. So, like, he could have peaches, but he couldn't have citric acid. So, if I found him a peach puree, it could not have anything added. It had to be just peaches. Um, if he didn't eat something, if he went too many days without eating something, there was the potential of him reacting. And so we had to make sure that things were rotated in weekly for a long time, um, which was difficult. And then we had family close by, and so trying to keep them in the loop of like, this is not safe, or like, he will be sensitive to cross contamination, so you can't touch this and then touch his food. Things like that were very hard to adjust to. for all of us. And then around the time that he turned 1 was when we noticed our son getting sick. It was actually, we went on vacation for not for Thelo's first birthday, but it just happened to fall around his first birthday. And it was the whole family, like extended family, that we all went and had this cabin up in the mountains and celebrated his first birthday. And we could just tell that something was wrong with Toby at that time. And we were all a little bit concerned with what was going on with him. And I remember just thinking, we need answers, and I need to get him into the doctor when we get back. And it wouldn't be for months later that we found out that he had cancer, but by the time we did, if we had not had him diagnosed the day that we did, we don't know that he would have lived much longer at home without treatment. For a lot of people, probably don't know a lot about like blood counts and how that works, but when he was diagnosed, and throughout his treatment, we often drew something called a CBC, platelets and the hemoglobins, the white blood cells, the red blood cells, but like also like lymphocytes and neutrophils and things like that, which are a little more obscure, which you wouldn't know about unless you had a medical reason to know about those things. And so when Toby was diagnosed, his hemoglobin was a 4, which is very, very low. Normal is like between 12 and sometimes 13 or so. 4 is very low to the point where like he needed several blood transfusions. And more than likely what I was seeing at home was a very high fever, and like his like color was pale, his lips were tinted blue a little bit. More than likely his body was preserving oxygen to his major organs at that point. His platelets were, I want to say they were 11 at diagnosis, which was put him at severe risk of internal bleeding.
Wow.
And his neutrophil count, which is kind of how your immune system fights infection, you want to see it between like a normal person would have it between like 2,000 and 4,000, sometimes even higher, especially if you're fighting an infection or an illness of some sort. Under 500 is considered neutropenic, which means that your body does not have an immune system to fight with, and his was 0. And so by the time he was diagnosed, all of his blood counts had just depleted, and they really weren't. I mean, it was very lucky that we caught it the day that we did. I remember in that moment, it was just very fuzzy and like hazy. It was like kind of being a little bit out of body, and also like this is very surreal. But looking back on it, knowing what I know now, that like we really are so lucky that he's here and that we have him. And it just makes it that much easier to not take these days for granted. I like having my kids home with me to homeschool, even when I'm as sick as I've been, because the days are fleeting and I don't have a guarantee for tomorrow. I don't know that Toby's not going to relapse. I don't know that we're not going to have another battle. And I don't know that this baby won't also have FPIES and that there won't also be struggles there. It's not a guarantee that the Lord gives us. He gives us today. And so I've just really come to a place where where I need to put them at the cross and say, okay, Lord, they're yours. They're not mine. You've given them to me for this time, but all I can do is enjoy it and make the best choices I can.
Yeah. So beautifully said. And that's true for any mom. I think we all come to a point where we realize, especially as a Christian, like they're not mine.
Right.
You love them, like you love them with everything you have, right? You'd cut
Right.
off your right arm, no question. And yet they're not yours.
Right.
And you've walked a road that has brought that to your
Yeah.
mind. Maybe more, some moms don't really realize that until crisis hits and you're like, oh, God is actually
In
there
charge.
in charge. Yeah. So that was kind of my next question is, through this all, how have you connected with God, particularly through these incredible trials? What did it
Um,
look like for you when everything was so surreal? And it's like both sides, right? This was simultaneous with your two
right.
sons.
Yeah. Yeah. Simultaneous. I not always very well, to be honest, not always very well. It was really hard. I think even as a young mom, it's hard to find that balance. I was very much I was a very hands-on mom. We co-slept and I nursed my babies, and because my husband worked so much, it just worked. I would nap with them if I needed to. I would go to bed with them if they were fussing and didn't want to stop nursing. Um, and it just worked, and I didn't find a lot of time or make a lot of time for myself and the Lord. Um, and when my son was diagnosed, I think when both of them were diagnosed, it just made life that much busier, and my relationship with God was not my priority at the time, which is hard for me to say because I'm a little bit ashamed of that, but also we were trying to survive. We were trying to save our kids, and there was really not very much extra time in the day besides just surviving.
Mm-hmm.
I prayed a lot. I listened to my worship, but I wasn't in the word. I wasn't I wasn't really very, I mean, aside from God just get me through this, my prayer life was not what it should have been. Um, but in the years since, so my son Toby has been off of chemo for a year and 3 months, and in this year we moved away when he was just 3 months off treatment, which was fairly quickly. And in this year, we have spent in marriage counseling and individual counseling. And in that time, I have rededicated my life to Christ and gotten baptized. Um, and it was through counseling that I realized that all this time I had always prayed that, like, God, like, save my kid, save my kid. And don't let him relapse, and just like protect him and give him this healthy, wonderful life. And it was in that time of counseling that I realized that if I'm only praying for Toby what I want for Toby, that my prayer life is sinful. And that what I need to be praying for them is not what I really want, which is like this safe little bubble around him to protect him and keep him here with me all the days of his life. But to pray that that God's will is done in his life, and that he is used the way that the Lord sees fit for him to be used. And I don't know if that means that he will grow up and never have cancer again and have this wonderful testimony, or if that means that he'll relapse, or if that means that I'll lose him, or if that means that he'll struggle with late-term side effects of chemo, or what that looks like. I don't know what that looks like, but the Lord does. And And ultimately Toby belongs to God and not to me. And so that was a really challenging lesson to learn.
Mm.
To learn that, like, even though God loves him more than I do, it might look different than I want it to.
Wow. It's a really powerful place of surrender.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but in my own journey as a mom, it's not like a one-time deal to just like say
Right.
it still gets deeper. Right. It almost like elastic. I kind of come back to that when there's crisis or
Right.
whatever, right? It's not like this one shot. You're like, oh, right, forgot.
Right.
Back. And it's okay that it's okay. Like that's the way I see it. It's okay to come back to that
Right.
because God knows we're only human, made of dust. And that I know for me, I've been really comforted when I've gone through some different crisis than you and more short term. Still,
Right.
it's real. Like everyone's child related crisis is theirs, right? It's
Right.
your storm, the way I think of it. And I didn't really know how to pray or like reading is almost like, I like how you said it, like my head was fuzzy, like just overload, like even reading would have been, I think, physically difficult for me.
Right.
And I was reminded of that verse in scripture talks about how our spirits groan
Right.
beyond words. And I'm like, I'm so glad God can hear me
Yeah.
groaning because I don't have words. I don't have pretty words. I don't even know if I could form sentences right now.
Yeah.
I'm like, God can hear that heart cry, and it comforted me because I was like, okay, good, because I'm not pretty right now. I'm not.
Right.
It doesn't look like normal Tara, but this is real. This is real me. Apparently, this
Right.
is what I look like when I'm in the fire.
Yeah. Or like when it talks about how the Holy Spirit intercesses for us and
Yes.
will go to the Lord before us.
Yes.
Um, and in those moments when we can't, he is, and
Yeah.
that's very comforting.
That is so comforting. That is so, and I just want anyone who's watching this now or in the future to just hear that, because sometimes I know we can grade ourselves. We're like, oh, but I'm not doing good enough. And I'm not reading the Bible enough, even though you're going through probably what could be the most intense trial of your life.
Right.
To like have grace and understand that God knows. He's not like grading you with an F for,
Right.
F. So, oh, well, wow, we've covered a lot. And I mean, I knew that this was going to be a heart wrencher because you have walked through some stuff, and thank you so much for everything you shared so far. We had some questions prepared. I'm just going to kind of skip through the ones that seem like what the Lord would have us talk about right now. So here we go. So in the midst of all of this, if you feel comfortable sharing, are there any sort of tips or tricks that you think might be helpful to other moms in their day-to-day life, especially if they're going through stuff like you with childhood illness and also like your own like really difficult pregnancy?
I have no idea, to be honest. I even wrote that one down. I don't have any tips or tricks. I I don't know. um God is so faithful though. Um when Toby was diagnosed and we were going through it, um I had Thilo, who he was 15 months old. He had 13 safe foods and breast milk. But I had not ever pumped. Like in 3 babies and 6 years of breastfeeding, I had never pumped milk. I just always fed them. I was with them all the time and I fed them. It was not a big deal. And so I wasn't able to pump for him. I didn't get very much because my body was not really trained to respond to a pump at that point. And so we were living in this hospital room, and my mom would bring him to us in the evenings, and he would sleep there with us because he needed to nurse. He needed the calories from nursing. And so I would be with Toby all day, and then I would nurse Philo all night long. He would just nurse all night long. And then he'd go back with my mom during the day, and she'd feed him solid foods, and then bring him back to me at night, and he would nurse all night long. Um, I remember sending my husband to the store for some things for Thilo to eat that were safe for him at the hospital, because not many things in the cafeteria were. And he was walking through the parking lot, and as he was walking into the store, he had a handful of change and cash in his pocket from tips that night. And as he was walking into the store, God was just whispering to him, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. And so he went and he picked up the things that he was going to have. He realized he had not eaten probably in 24 hours. He grabbed a pack of nuts for himself, and then he rang himself up, and the change that was in his pocket was the exact amount of his total. It wasn't much, but it was the exact amount. It was like he had $13 and it was like $12.97 or something like that. And he just stood there kind of like dumbfounded, because he was like, how are we gonna pay for this? How are we gonna get through this? How are we gonna survive this? And God was just telling him, like, I've got this, I've got this, I will take care of you. And it just always worked out that way, that like when we knew that we had a really big grocery bill coming up because we had to find food for Thilo and it was very expensive, people would send us money. Like, we don't even know where it would come from. Sometimes my aunt would give us $100 every month, and it just happened to be the time that we needed more snacks for the baby, and I would be able to stock up on those things. And our car broke down and needed fixed, and it took all of our savings to fix it. And that day at the hospital, while my son was under anesthesia, he was having a spinal tap, somebody stopped me and said, I like to choose one cancer family every year to bless around the holidays. And she stopped me and she gave me a check, and it was for the exact amount of the car bill that we had just paid. And I didn't even look at it until after I left the hospital. Like, she didn't know. She had no idea. There was a wagon that we really wanted. He slept really hard after anesthesia, and we would often take him home asleep, but he was getting heavier, and it was hard to get him out to the car, especially by myself. Sometimes I had to do it by myself. And there was this wagon that I wanted. I'm sure you guys have all seen it. It's like the radio flyer. It's like soft and it like zips down, and it was just really nice. And it was at Costco that year for Christmas, and I had been eyeing it, but like we didn't have the money for that, and it wasn't gonna happen. And somebody stopped me at church and said, hey, we just got in like donations in our food bank from Costco, and there's this wagon back there that we think would be really wonderful for your family. And it was the one that I wanted, and it was soft until we could lay in it and sleep in it out to the car. And when he wasn't feeling well, we could hang his feeding backpack on it, and it was just a really huge blessing and really suited our family and our needs at that time. And I think the biggest tip that I can tell you is that whatever seems too big for you is not too big for God. And he's not going to let you drown. And he even cares about the little details, like the wagon.
The wagon. Oh my gosh, I'm crying. Like, all right, this one was going to have some waterworks, understandably. That is beautiful. I mean, really, that's the best advice. Thank you. Well, listen, we've had our time together. This has been so beautiful. I'm so honored that you shared all of this with me. I know it's going to bless a lot of other women, whether they're going through it now or they're going to go through it. Like you said, we don't know what tomorrow brings.
Right.
Today has enough troubles of its own.
Right.
So if people would like to get in touch with you, just, mom to mom, what would be a good way they could maybe connect with you if they are going through this, or they would love to just connect with you as a friend, as a support? What would be a good way to get in touch?
I'm on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any other social media. I don't have like a platform or an influence or anything like that.
No problem.
Influence. My name is Annabel Marie
Mhm.
on Facebook.
All right. So
Um,
be sure to include your Facebook
yeah.
name that you use so that if people would like to get in touch with you and just let you know
Mhm,
how this impacted them, or if they have any
mhm.
maybe questions, maybe they even live in your area, then that would be
Right.
great. Thank you again so much for taking time out of your life. And when you're not feeling particularly well at all, we'll be praying for you, Annabelle. And I look forward to hearing, let me know as how your pregnancy is going. And I would love to
Thank
stay in touch with you and encourage you in your own journey of grace. Thank you again so much for encouraging me. I'm encouraged. So thank you so much.
you.
All right. God bless you today. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye.